So after every NFL season, there's a Super Bowl champion and there's a Super Bowl loser. And typically, we only care about the champions and maybe like the passing leaders, your Tom Brady and things like that. But we really don't talk about the underrated players or players who have their breakout seasons, their best seasons in these specific seasons. And I have a new series that I'm going to start up today, pretty much talking about the all underrated teams in the years in 2000s and 2010s and even these 2020 season, because there are a lot of players that we tend to forget about that have some really great seasons or have their breakout season and things like that. And sometimes some of these players, their narrative changes. But with all that being said, I'm not going to spoil it. Let's get straight into the video. And so we're going to start in one of the best years in NFL history, in my eyes, in the year 2007. Now, in that year, there were a lot of good narratives, a lot of good stories and things like that that happened that year. One of them being, first things first, could the Colts repeat their Super Bowl run in 2007? Because if you remember in 06, Peyton Manning, he won his first Super Bowl with the Colts in 06, and they beat the Chicago Bears. We also have the Randy Moss and Tom Brady duo, and obviously that sparked up the, how historic can they be, things like that. And they went 16-0, and we all know, sadly, they went down to the New York Giants in the Super Bowl in a historic fashion. David Tyree, was that David Tyree? I don't know, I forgot, but yeah, a lot of good narratives. And again, this is a underrated video about players that really did not get noticed or didn't get their correct recognition. So I'm going to do that today. And one of the first players that he did make a Pro Bowl, but his narrative has definitely changed, in Marcus Trufant. Marcus Trufant, man, his narrative has changed, like I said, because he's really regarded now as a really good number 2 corner on that Legion of Boom back in 2012, man. But in 2007, man, he had one of his best years ever in his career, probably his best year ever. Now, first things first, he did make a Pro Bowl, his one and only Pro Bowl, which is very good. But the Seahawks, man, they had a gauntlet of receivers that they played all season, and he held his own. First things first, man, he gave up about 116 targets and like 60 catches, and that's about, I think, under half, under 50%. And within those targets, he only gave up 3 touchdowns in 16 games. 3 touchdowns on 117 targets, bruh. Very impressive. He had a 59.7 QBR rating when quarterbacks passed towards him and things like that. But again, they had a gauntlet of receivers. They played the Bengals, Chad Johnson. They played the Cardinals, Larry Fitzgerald. They played the Browns, Braylon Edwards. As you can see on the screen right here, he definitely held his own, man. And that season does not really get talked about when we talk about Marcus Trufant. All we talk about is, him and Richard Sherman and him and the Legion of Boom, or he was just a piece of the Legion of Boom. I firmly believe that Marcus Trufant, he is one of the most underrated corners in the NFL. But this is just 2007, so let's keep it going. And since we're on the topic of DBs, we got to talk about receivers, because there were a lot of really good receivers. And funny enough, Marcus Trufant did guard one of these guys in his campaign, and that is Marquise Colston. Now, Marquise Colston, he's never made a Pro Bowl, never made an All-Pro. He has his ring with the Saints, but he's always been under the radar. And after his rookie season, he had about 1,000 yards. Somehow, he even got better in year 2, and probably his best year ever as a pro. He had 143 targets towards him. Drew Brees threw the ball to him 143 times. He had 98 receptions, 1,200 yards, and 11 touchdowns. And the yards, the targets, the receptions, the touchdowns, all career highs, man. And he had a 68.5 catch percentage. And that is second highest in his career. And again, no Pro Bowl, no All-Pro, no nothing, like no recognition from his 2007 season. I think like a lot of Saints fans don't even talk about him, and I just want to give him his flowers, because Marquise Colston, he's always been super underrated, and he's on my all underrated 2017. And another receiving target that was really underrated back in 2007 from Houston Texans, Owen Daniels, man, the big body tight end. The guy was 6'3", 245. Well, not big body, but you know what I mean. But this was his breakout season. And in 2008, he did make his first Pro Bowl with the Texans. But in 2007, he had an argument to make a Pro Bowl that year. He had 94 targets, 63 receptions, 768 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Besides the touchdowns, I mean, in '08, he did outperform everything else, but in '07, again, a very underrated season, and we can't just let that not be talked about. And the guy who will be throwing the ball to these receivers, or the tight end and the receiver, is Derek Anderson. Derek Anderson, from the Cleveland Browns in '07, obviously he had a pretty decent career. He always stayed on the team, but in '07, he made his first and only Pro Bowl, and he won 10-5, but the Browns did not make the playoffs, okay, and you're going to see why. He had about 3,700 yards, almost 3,400. He had 29 touchdowns, but 19 interceptions, bruh, and that was top 5 in the NFL that year. And you're not going to win a lot of games, or you're not going to edge out opponents if you throw 19 interceptions. That's more than 1 per game. So some games he was throwing 2, and I think he even had a game he even threw 3. So very underrated, but at the same time, you got to clean that up. And I did not forget, we do need guys to pound the rock down the middle. We got Thomas Jones, the 29-year-old vet from the New York Jets in '07. He had about 1,100 yards. He only scored once, but, in '05 and '06, he actually played a lot better. He had 1,300 yards in '05, and he had about 1,200 in '06, and he had 9 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns. But this is '07, so we're going to talk about that only. And definitely, he deserves some recognition. He did make a Pro Bowl in 2008, which his numbers were a lot better than all 3 of those seasons. But still, in '07, '05, and '06, does not get talked about too much for those Chicago Bears and the New York Jets. And for our last guy on offense, man, we got Ernest Graham. Now, Ernest Graham, he was a 5'9" running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was Darren Sproles before Darren Sproles, pretty much. He had about 324 receiving yards on 69 targets, and 49 of those were receptions. So he had a pretty hefty load as a running back. And nowadays, we see running backs with those stat lines every year. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's tons of guys who can catch out the backfield, but back in the early 2000s, there were only very few guys who were receiving backs. And on top of it, he had 900 rushing yards, so dude was definitely valuable. He was only 27 in '07, so that was his peak in his career. And now we go to the defensive side of the ball, and the first guy we got to talk about is Andre Carter for the Washington Redskins at the time. Back in '07, he played for the Niners for like 4 or 5 seasons. Then he went to the Redskins in '06. He had about 6 sacks, and then he had 10.5 sacks in '07 for the Redskins. Again, no Pro Bowl, no All-Pro, no recognition. Now he was top 10 in Comeback Player of the Year, but like nobody's gonna talk about Comeback Player of the Year, 5th or 6th or 7th, 8th place. If you won it, then yeah, maybe they'll talk about you. But he doesn't get talked about. So again, 10.5 sacks, super good. Next, we got E.J. Henderson for the Minnesota Vikings in '07. He had 119 total tackles, 17 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, and dude was just balling out as an interior linebacker. And again, we don't really talk about him now. The interior linebacker in the 2000s and things like '90s, Ray Lewis, like he was the top guy. So I can definitely understand why he doesn't get a lot of recognition. But like no Pro Bowl. I mean, he did make a Pro Bowl back in 2010. But besides that, like he doesn't really have a whole lot on his resume. But in '07, man, he was definitely balling out for the Vikings. And again, nobody talks about it everywhere on the field. And I want to have him on my all underrated team. And finally, we got Thomas Howard for the Oakland Raiders, man. I play a lot of the old school Maddens. Thomas Howard, he's super fast on those old school Maddens. I've always like developed him and things like that. But I did not know bro had 6 interceptions as an interior linebacker in 2007. And to put that in perspective, there's only been 2 other linebackers who have had more than 5 interceptions. That is Luke Kuechly and DeAndre Levy, I don't know, but both of them had 6. So all 3 of these guys had 6. Now there have been numerous linebackers that have 5 interceptions, but only 3 have only cracked 6. So 6 interceptions is very, very good. And on top of that, he had 96 total tackles, 1 sack, 3 tackles for loss, and I forgot to say this, he had 2 touchdowns on those interceptions. So dude was definitely balling out. He never made a Pro Bowl, never made an All-Pro, never made any sort of any sort of like recognition or anything like that. So today, that's what I'll be doing. But besides that, man, that is our 2007 all-decade team. I probably will have these every week, just all-decade team. Next week, I don't know what I will do next, but I'm not going to go in order. I probably just randomize them, things like that. But besides that, guys, this is your boy, Fourth and Goal. We are out, man. Peace.